Welcome to Sociology Vibes, where we simplify challenging ideas into easy to understand insights. Today, our focus is on the sociological explanations of Eurocentrism and Eugenics. Eurocentrism refers to the belief or practice of viewing the world primarily through a European or Western cultural perspective, often treating European history, art, and ideas as the standard by which all others are judged. In schools, this appears when textbooks focus mainly on European achievements, Western philosophies, or English language histories, presenting global diversity as a side note or an add-on. Sociologists often reference the WASP culture, an acronym which stands for White, Anglo-Saxon Protestant. This group included the first European immigrants to the 13 American colonies, who primarily migrated from Northern and Western Europe, including countries and territories such as England, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Netherlands, and Germany. These regions were home to Anglo and Saxon ethnic groups and various Protestant religions that emerged from the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s when Christians broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. Religious Protestant groups such as Calvinists, Quakers, Lutherans, Methodists, Presbyterians, and Episcopalians migrated to the 13 colonies, seeking religious freedom and the opportunity to practice their faith without persecution. They shared similar cultural, religious values, including hard work, individual responsibility, and moral discipline, which over time became deeply woven into early American identity and treated as a cultural norm in the U.S. society. The WASPs became the dominant social group and had a significant influence on U.S. history. They racialized other groups, defining who was considered white, who was not, and used their power to shape laws, social institutions, and cultural values. These norms influenced ideas about what was considered proper, educated, or truly American, often excluding and devaluing people and cultures that did not reflect their own cultural standards and values. European ethnic groups with non-Protestant backgrounds, including Catholics and Jews, were not always considered fully white when they first arrived in the United States. The process of racialization demonstrated that whiteness was not just about skin color, it was also about religion, culture, and power. Because Catholics and Jews came from different religious and cultural traditions, and often from countries in Southern and Eastern Europe, they were viewed as outsiders and faced discrimination in housing, employment, and education. Over time, many of these groups gained acceptance into whiteness through assimilation as they adopted English Protestant-influenced cultural norms and moved into higher social and economic positions. The term Caucasian became a scientific-sounding label that helped expand the category of white to include more European ethnic groups. Although the two terms are often used interchangeably, white represents a social category, belonging, and privilege, while the Caucasian term originated as an outdated biological classification used to justify racial social hierarchy and discrimination. However, non-European immigrants, including those from China, Japan, and Mexico, faced even greater discrimination than the non-Protestant Europeans. While Catholics and Jews were eventually accepted into whiteness, these groups remained excluded and were directly targeted by exclusionary laws. For example, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 was the first major U.S. law to ban immigration based on race or nationality, targeting Chinese laborers and denying them citizenship. Later, the Immigration Act of 1924 set strict quotas favoring Northern and Western Europeans, while excluding most immigrants from Asia. Mexican immigrants also faced mass deportations during the Great Depression of the 1930s, even when many of them were legal U.S. residents. Around the same time, the eugenics movement became popular in the United States. Eugenics was a false science that claimed society could be improved by promoting the reproduction of people with so-called desirable traits, mainly white, Northern European Protestants, and limiting those labeled as unfit. Beginning in the early 1900s, more than 30 U.S. states passed laws allowing the forced sterilization of people deemed unfit to reproduce. These included those labeled as mentally ill, disabled, poor, or belonging to marginalized racial or ethnic groups. The 1927 Supreme Court case Buck v. Bell upheld the constitutionality of forced sterilization, with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes infamously writing, "3 generations of imbeciles are enough." Eugenics supporters had exhibits at state fairs where families were judged on health, intelligence, and appearance, promoting the false idea that people of Northern European descent represented the nation's best genetics. Earlier in 1896, the Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson legalized racial segregation under the doctrine of separate but equal. Although Plessy dealt with segregation and Buck v. Bell ruling focused on eugenics, both reflected the same false belief that certain groups were naturally superior to others. Both reveal how the law helped legitimize racial social hierarchy and normalize discrimination. Adolf Hitler's fascist government studied American eugenics laws and sterilization programs, using them as precedent for the racial policies that contributed to the Holocaust. And although the eugenics movement lost credibility after World War II, sterilizations continued in some states way into the 1970s, often targeting Black, Latina, and Indigenous women, a reality that pseudoscientific racism continued to influence policy long after the ideology itself was discredited. Contemporary immigration enforcement shows a disproportionate share of detentions and deportations involving people from Central and South America, Africa, and parts of Asia. These enforcement patterns reflect how the legacy of racialized immigration policy still impacts who's most likely to be excluded or placed under scrutiny. What began as a search for religious freedom gradually evolved into a cultural system that defined who belonged and who did not. Eurocentrism shaped how the world was viewed. WASP culture set the early standards for what was considered American, and eugenics later tried to justify those hierarchies through false science. In everyday life, this awareness encourages critical thinking, from questioning whose voices are represented in textbooks, media, or leadership, to recognizing who is left out. It helps us see how the dominant culture and even science are socially constructed, understand diversity and inequality, and practice inclusion in our everyday lives and communities. And this makes sociology worth exploring further, don't you think? Thank you for watching. Be sure to comment below with your thoughts, questions, or any topics you'd like us to explore next. Let's keep the conversation going and our community growing. See you in the next Sociology Vibes video.